You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest-running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. Is called DM Radio. Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here with another all-star cast, folks. We're going to talk about something that frankly got me into this business a long time ago. I wrote an article about real-time data warehousing way back in the year of our Lord, 2002 or something like that. It was a long time ago. And it takes a while to get there these days. So we do amazing things in the technology space, but real-time data warehousing, it was a topic 20 years ago. It's the real thing today in many ways, but we're actually seeing a whole evolution, a real renaissance around real-time analytical platforms, whether for building apps or for data discovery, data science, for example, lots of different things, lots of ways to skin the cat too. So we have an all-star cast today. We'll be hearing from Damian Black, my good buddy of SQLStream fame. We've got Fadi Azhari from a relatively new company called StarRocks, and Greg Michaelson, a veteran of the space, most recently from DataRobot, who's been doing this stuff for a long time. So we'll talk about what's happening, why it matters, and what it means for you. And I guess, first of all, I'll bring in Damian Black from SQLStream. That's SQLStream. Of course, SQL stands for the structured query language. So Damian Black, tell us about your time at SQLStream. And you guys saw this coming from a long time ago, right?
Yes, absolutely, Eric. And in fact, it was inspired by internet and telecom data that was just gushing out and was defeating at the time the ability of data warehouses to be able to process that, because you have millions of records coming per second and want to analyze continually what's going on. At the time you wait for the queries to complete, you're out of date by billions of records. And it's all sort of gone full circle now. So I now work at Guavus, part of Thales. Thales acquired SQLStream. It's been merged with Guavus, and they do real-time analytics over telecom data. So what we're seeing right now is this 5G wave, which is pushing for ultra-low latency, distributed applications operating at the edge. And SQLStream is the technology that's underlying all of the application suites that Guavus is putting to give your machine learning driven analytics of what's going on all of these new enterprise applications and services. And SQLStream is available also generally in the market. So we still sell that as a separate self-contained platform. It was the pioneer. It operates and allows you to be able to query and analyze using SQL language, turning it inside out. So you run the queries against the live streams of data, and with sub-millisecond latency, you get an instant stream of answers coming back. So it's clearly, very, very important now. The whole world wants to be able to process distributed information and get answers immediately.
Yeah, fast answers. That's what everybody wants, certainly in telco and in other very intensive industries where you have tons and tons of telemetry data flying around, and you want to be able to solve problems very quickly, right? The whole analytics industry really came out of the data warehousing space, which was designed 40 and 50 years ago, arguably, at least those architectures of persisting the data, then doing your analysis on top of that relational data model, basically. But now there are lots and lots of ways to do things. And I think that it's the blessing and curse of our industry, right? That there are lots of ways to do things. The key is understanding what is your use case, what sources of data do you have, and what's going to be the most effective way for you to get that done, right, Damian?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key word here is telemetry. Actually, it's the continuous, distribution and availability of updated, time-based information that you have to make sense of to make the right kinds of decisions in this highly complex, connected world. And SQL turns out to be part of the holy grail for parallel processing, ironically. And I started my career right back at university. I won't embarrass myself or anybody else and how long ago that was, but data flow architectures were the next big thing for parallel processing. But people were looking for a language, a specialized language. You may remember Occam and other, also single assignment languages, to try and provide a way of programming systems so you could extract the parallelism. Problem with the functional approaches, with those recursion, it stops the effective use of the hardware. But right in front of all of us was the SQL language. And once you apply SQL to these infinite streams, you suddenly got the ultimate data flow language. You can do your parallel processing, and now it's just so beautifully adapted to the world of large numbers of CPU cores, inexpensive high-performance memory, and everything connected with high-performance, inexpensive networks. And it's just, the right technology at the right time. And everything being connected, you want to make those real-time decisions and take advantage of all of the information. And the SQL and relational way is the only way you can do this in an optimized, reliable, sort of mathematically sound way. That's why the relational database is still at the apex of the data pyramid.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, you talk about SQL, we often talk about the history of our industry and kind of how we got to where we are today. In the pre-show, we were joking about Hadoop, which of course came out of Yahoo as the engine for indexing the web. And then you had companies like Cloudera and Hortonworks and MapR really building out what was the foundation of an ecosystem. And I think there were a couple of big mistakes made along the way. As I recall, Cloudera and Hortonworks kind of thumbed their noses at SQL. And the vision was, oh no, it's going to be a future of MapReduce, which was, again, this construct designed to index the web. But that turned out to be pretty hard to reverse engineer for a lot of analytic use cases, time series stuff, for example. And so it just didn't work as well. And then what did we have? We had this whole movement of SQL on Hadoop. So we had people trying to bolt on sort of a SQL interface to the Hadoop file system. That also didn't work terribly well. And then what happened? You have Snowflake come out as a relational database in the cloud. There were already other databases in the cloud that were doing pretty well, Redshift among them, of course. But Snowflake just took off. And I just came back from their conference, and they're now talking about supporting all these different languages, Python. They're just adding to right now. Of course, SQL is the foundational language used in an environment, but they're talking about all kinds of data, all kinds of workloads, everything they're focused on. It's a pretty ambitious agenda. And so one of the challenges I think here, Damian, is that the environment keeps changing and evolving, and companies that want to use the latest and the greatest have to pay attention to that and figure out how they're going to get access to that. But what do you think about that, Damian?
Yeah, the relational model in terms of describing everything in terms of tables and streams is a great way of describing the attributes you care about. But those attributes could be drawn from any kind of information. It could even be from a voicemail. It could be from an image. It could come from semi-structured, even unstructured information. But SQL is a way of managing the information. Within SQLStream, we support Java and C++ and Python that can all be dynamically loaded. You need to do that today because those are the languages that are the output for most of the machine learning models. And you want to be able to load those to provide the kind of, the smart AI interpretation of data and of data streams. And you want to have that working in conjunction with the good old reliable SQL view of the world as structured view where you know what you want to do. And I kind of view the AI approach, the machine learning model, as the unstructured approach, because you don't know what the logic is that connects the inputs to the outputs. You want that to be divined by the machine learning itself. But you want those systems to work with the structured reasoning as well. So I think the relational world is the only one that provides that sort of foundation. And you're seeing Snowflake, you're seeing all of the big data solutions, even the NoSQL databases, of course, are all rushing to support and do support in most cases SQL, because it is the way that you have to, it's the way that only way people can manage information ultimately.
Yeah, it's a standard. It's a de facto standard. It's everywhere. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And certainly from what we saw at the Snowflake Summit, it's very popular. It's going to be, and there are a lot of people who know SQL. So once there's a language that's effective, that people know how to use, that people want to use, well, you kind of have to go with the flow and deliver what people want to have delivered. So let's bring in Fadi Azhari next. He's from Star Rocks, a relatively new company, again, doing very interesting things, a massively parallel analytics database. Fadi, tell us a bit about yourself and what Star Rocks is doing and why you're coming out with this information, with this technology now.
Sure, happy to. So I'm Fadi Azhari. I'm the VP of Marketing, recently joined Star Rocks. Star Rocks has been in existence since 2020, so for 2020, so fairly new. We are SQL compatible, completely SQL compatible, real-time fast analytics. That's where our focus is really on delivering blazing performance in a very easy way, to make it easy in democratizing actually the use of analytics. We all know that the space has been, as you mentioned, very crowded, Eric. But really our focus is not to be the Swiss Army knife to everybody. We're focusing on really delivering that experience to everyone in the organization and focusing on making sure that the speed they expect from real-time analytics is there to serve their needs, because organizations are going through huge amount of digital transformation, adding new services, connecting their operations to their end user services and so on and so forth. So they need such an engine. So that's the focus of our organization. And that's what we're doing. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, and you folks got back to the drawing board. And as I recall from a briefing I took just recently, you really focused on vectorization and leveraging the power of vectors. Can you go at least into a high level about what that means and why it's important for analytics?
Absolutely. So if you think about the problem, why is real-time analytics so difficult? There's a couple of things that come to mind. I'll give a bit of a context and then dive specifically into that area that you asked about. But data freshness and responsiveness are both important, right? So it's not just about getting the data, but being able to query it and analyze it. And one of the things that a lot of companies have been doing is doing some schema of denormalizing the data, right, into flat tables. And by doing so, yes, you can gain sort of a more access to data, but it makes the access to data difficult to analyze if you are changing constantly your data, right? So we believe that with our vectorized engine, the way we approached it, we're able to address both flat tables as well as Snowflake schema, right? So they are able to work on both and achieve significant performance advantage. So the vectorized engine that we implemented addresses that, and it addresses it in such a way it makes it simple for people to adopt either approaches and still achieve at least 2 to 3x performance advantage over what's out there.
Yeah, that's very cool stuff. And, I just looked up the other day after I came back from Snowflake. One of the founders of Snowflake actually came from a company called VectorWise, which is a part of, I think, the Actian portfolio. And I remember learning about that probably 10 years ago. So they were one of the early database companies to focus on vectors. And just, I'll give my take on this and correct me if I'm wrong, Fadi, but I remember from back in my early days in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started working with a web company in the Flash space. So Macromedia Flash, which came from a company called Future Splash way back when. They actually built the Simpsons website back in like 1998 or 1999. And I was blown away by it because you could zoom in on this graphic and it would remain clear. Well, why is that? Because they use vectors. So they use a formula basically to tell the computer how to generate the image instead of a pixel-based approach, which is what JPEGs and GIFs and other things like that use. So, and the benefits are tremendous. There are lots of benefits, one of which is the size, like the file size is much smaller because you're just giving a set of instructions to the computer to do something. Is it similar with vectorization in this context?
Yeah, so within this context, let me dive in a little bit more as to what the vectorization does. So we believe we're the only query engine that allows you to execute across CPU, memory, and the storage layer, right? So you're taking advantage of all the layers and being able to do that in parallel, right? So that's what in this case, it allows you to actually do the execution, but do it in a very economical way, right? So you're really honing in on the results you want to get out of your analytics, but doing it across all those layers in a parallel way. That's how we use the vectorized query engine in our implementation.
Yeah, this is very, very cool stuff. And then maybe tell us a bit about some of the use cases. So who are you targeting? We heard from Damian. Telco obviously is a hot industry for real-time data, but who do you target?
Yeah, so typically we target organizations that are going through a major digital transformation, existing large organizations that are adding new services, SaaS services at the edge of the network. But think of it as all the innovative SaaS companies that are delivering services that are constantly changing and need analytics on the fly. One of the customers we have in the US is Airbnb. And they're using our engine to actually drive the analytics they need for Minerva, which is their metrics platform, right? So at the edge. So use case like this, for instance, they're able to quickly analyze from their users and their operations team to actually understand what's going on and even deploy that in a highly concurrent way because of the amount of users we can support, tens of thousands, to their end customers. So think of it as an analytics engine that allows people to flatten the amount of analytics you get from the edge, the user, all the way to the inside of your organization. That's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, and that's a really, really useful approach, quite frankly, because I refer to it as a sort of a B2B2C play, right? So you're providing services to your customers who are in turn extending the power of those services to their customers. And that's a wonderful reality for lots of different reasons. One of which is because it helps your clients better serve their customers. And I got to tell you, once you can interact with data, whether it's just some small dashboard inside your SaaS environment, for example, or it's little recommendations you're getting from the engine about what to do, who to reach out to, how to respond to certain things. Once you start getting that real-time feed, you don't want to go back. I mean, it really inspires people to get more active, to start asking more questions. And that begins this whole conversation where you're genuinely leveraging the power of analytics. You're no longer just talking about being data-driven. You are being data-driven and analytics-driven in particular. And that's really, really good stuff. So we'll pick this up after the break, folks. We're talking to Fadi Azhari from StarRocks. We're talking to Greg Michaelson next, formerly of DataRobot, and of course, Damian Black of SQLStream. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome back to DM Radio, talking all things real-time analytics today. There are lots of ways you can get that done. We heard from Damian Black of SQLStream. They've been doing real-time analytics for a long time. We heard also from Fadi Azhari from a relatively new company called StarRocks. They're building out an engine to do just that. And Greg Michaelson is up next. And Greg is from DataRobot for about 7 years or so and has been around doing this kind of stuff for a while. So Greg, tell us a bit about yourself and really where you see the industry going and maybe where the inflection points are or are not yet. What do you think?
Well, yeah, like you say, I joined DataRobot back before sort of the rise of automated machine learning and the citizen data scientist, and we I think I would say helped kind of build that kind of ethos or that sort of push for putting AI in everything. But certainly over the last 7 years, I've found that there are so many vendors out there that are producing products that are like in search of a solution. You know what I mean? So you have these innovation teams at these organizations, large organizations that have big software budgets and sort of go around to trade shows and talk to vendors and just play, but making the connection between those products and actual business problems and use cases and so on is a super challenging thing. So my first question whenever looking at a company or a technology or whatever is, do organizations actually need this, and how hard is it to convince people that it's something that they can actually apply and use?
Yeah, and I guess there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, you mentioned these innovation teams, and I've been an advocate and will remain so for every mid-sized to large company having a sort of information strategy or a data strategy group to kind of understand. And a lot of times you'll hear it called a center of excellence, where you help educate the business about how these technologies can apply. I think that's part of what we need to have if this stuff is going to work, right? Because you always want to make sure it aligns to a business goal, but then how do you actually do that? I mean, do you think a center of excellence is the way to go, or what are your thoughts?
I think that the market for this kind of technology is significantly smaller than most people think that it is. If you've ever worked with, like, say, a chief financial officer, and you go to him and you say, hey, Mr. CFO, we want you to use forecasting, time series forecasting, machine learning for your revenue forecast that you share with the board. He will say, okay, well, if you have a dashboard, I'll happily look at it, but thank you very much. We have a process, and we don't need no stinking machine learning for numbers that we're going to show to the board, if you know what I mean. So you've got a bunch, the people that are running businesses are perfectly happy to look at analytics if they happen to be around and happen to be useful. But I think that there is still, even in the biggest companies, a significant level of resistance to this kind of technology. And I don't think that COEs and innovation teams are actually making it better in most cases. I think, largely speaking, innovation teams and centers of excellence have a reputation for being sort of black holes of value, cost centers, not profit centers, to be sure. So to me, the big challenge for vendors out there and for buyers is a customer segmentation problem. There are, say, 5% of companies that know exactly how they want to use analytics, whether it's real-time data or machine learning or dashboards or whatever it might be. They know, and they've got a plan, and they're going to go and buy the tools, and they're very sophisticated in what they do, and they actually use that technology to make their business run better. Everybody else has no clue. And so you look at these companies and they're in the category of, like, okay, if this is really, really easy and really, really valuable, then okay, we'll use it. But otherwise, stay over there in the COE and leave me alone. Kind of thing. That's what I've seen in the last 7 years.
Over there in the COE and leave me alone. That's pretty funny. It's well, I mean, there is some truth to that. And I wonder how long that can last, right? I mean, especially as we go through a bit of a slowing down now in the economy. One nice thing about low tide is you get to see where all the bodies are buried, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So if you look at all these real-time data companies that are out there, probably less than 5% of them actually use their own product for real-time data analysis, right? And, even like machine learning companies, do they actually use machine learning to run their business? That's a big question mark, I think. So to me, the big thing here is that there are organizations that know how to use this stuff and they do it profitably. No vendor is going to be able to get a company to that point. That's something that their executives have to drive. The big telcos, the big retail companies, Walmarts, your Kroger's, your those types of companies, your very largest healthcare companies, and so on. They are doing this. Everybody else either doesn't care or is completely clueless, in my opinion, on how to use this technology.
Yeah, that's not surprising, really, because you have to have some business use case to get things rolling. I was very impressed with what I saw from DataRobot, and I know you wrote something on LinkedIn recently. If someone wants some good entertaining content to absorb about DataRobot, just look up Greg Michelson's LinkedIn profile, and you'll find some comments there. But I wonder. I mean, are we going through another sort of AI ML winter like we've seen before? What do you think?
It certainly feels like a bubble to me in some ways. There's been so much venture capital out there. It's just been so easy to raise money to do all of these different companies and all these different ideas that I think that the good ideas, I mean, there are cool companies out there. Like there's a company called AtScale that's out there that does some really innovative stuff. I talked with a company called Snowplow that's doing some really, really neat stuff around click data and click analytics and things like that. There's definitely diamonds out there, but for them, there's also a lot of noise. And I think expecting organizations, businesses that are not in that space to kind of figure out what the diamonds are and what the separate the wheat and the chaff, as it were, is a pretty tall order, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's bring maybe Damian Black back in to kind of comment on some of this stuff. Because again, you've been doing this stuff for a long time, Damian. So, 15 years ago, you had to do some explaining to people about SQL on live data, on streaming data. Now, within the confines of the industry, the sort of insiders understand what that stuff means. But I think part of the challenge is that there is this big, long tail of legacy technology and legacy processes and legacy mindsets. Where do you think we are on the learning curve for leveraging real-time analytics for real business solutions? Damian?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to comment first of all on the challenge in deploying AI. I think when you're involved in in the real-time world, a lot of people making decisions are not operating in the real-time world, and the CFO is probably one of those people that's furthest away from that. But if you look at all of the connected things that are out there, whether vehicles, aircraft, all forms of transportation devices, and if you're sitting in Ukraine and you've got a missile coming towards you, then you have to make decisions in real time, and you can't wait, sit around for weeks and months. You've got to make decisions there and then. So I think the real time use cases are coming now from the fact that everything is becoming connected, and anything that's is moving and generating a lot of data that affects people's lives and safety, then it becomes really important to make real-time decisions. In terms of the question you were asking about, yes, people do move slowly. They change their perception slowly. A lot of people, I often do think that, a lot of people today would be quite happy in their buggies with a robot horse dragging them along as fast as they possibly can, because that's just the way they look at the world. And a lot of people still think that what they need is an in-memory database because they want to do things faster. What they really want to do is to be able to adapt incrementally to new information that's coming, and that now is starting to take off, but it's taken the full 15 years of people to realize that. And SQLStream is still the only company that I'm aware of that was designed from the get-go around SQL standards. Everybody else has grafted a SQL interface on top as an afterthought, almost begrudgingly. So, and that probably tells you something about how the world looks at things right now. And if you actually do design it though and embrace it properly from the get-go, then you find you've got an approach system that's we have for example, we are somewhere between 10 and 100 times faster than Spark Streaming. Spark Streaming is still a batch-based, micro batch-based system, which means you can't react and respond to each and every new record. That new record might be an indication of a missile if you're a Ukrainian soldier, and it's rather important that you react and respond to every record. So people start to understand the importance, and they start to see this, it is like shoals of fish. They will suddenly turn, but you've got to get to that sort of that pivot point, that breaking point when everything just changes. And I think we're getting there now because of the connectivity, because there's so much information that people want to react and respond to.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring Fadi back in from Star Rocks. What is fascinating to me is watching this industry and watching how we really can learn from the mistakes of the past. Not that it always happens, of course, but you'll recognize things like, take Snowflake, for example. A couple of things they did that I thought was very clever is, number one, this whole separating compute and storage, which is kind of a big deal. But number two, they figured out that when a schema is wrong or suboptimal in the old world of data warehousing, changing that schema was a pretty significant challenge, because then you have to reload data, you have to do a whole bunch of stuff, and it's kind of a pain. And they figured out, look, if we can let people just tear it down, redesign it, and then rebuild it very quickly, that's a much different story. So, and that's just one of these little innovations that we picked up along the way. And of course, StarRocks, from what I understand, one thing you folks figured out is, hey, it would be great to have this vectorization across the whole process so we can optimize start to finish and be able to deliver that real-time analytical capability like people have been expecting for years. And, you know, part of the challenge, as Greg was musing about here, is that there have been promises and promises, like in that Lady Gaga song, right? Promises, promises. Like, there are lots of people in the enterprise who are like, yeah, you told me that 5 years ago, but it didn't quite work out. But I do feel like we have learned lessons, and you can kind of see it in the StarRocks architecture. But what do you think, Fadi?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to do is work backwards from the customer pain points. So we realized that people were not satisfied with what they had, because a lot of the solutions that were out there, they were treating the problem or the pain points by think about it by looking at it as a tree problem rather than the forest problem. Right. So what we looked at, it's not about normalizing or denormalizing. So they started out by saying, okay, well, we could denormalize the tables and all of a sudden we're going to get better performance. Instead of looking at the pain point that customers have is, I want to be able to not to have to worry about denormalize or not normalize, to make it easy. And we talk about consuming the database so easily and the engine. So we looked at how we can build innovation in our product to allow you not to have to worry about this, and to allow you also not to worry about, for instance, whether if your data is changing, how do you make sure that that data is still fresh and you can use it? So that's number two. And the third problem with the real-time analytics issues that we're not addressing the issues is the amount of scaling, the amount of concurrent users that need to use the platform.
Yep.
And that's something I think the organization has failed in doing. You know, most of the solutions that are out there can support maybe about 100 or so, maybe 1,000 concurrent users. But to make really real-time analytics a reality for everyone in the enterprise, so more people participate into that analytics platform, so you can enrich the platform and deliver better services, you got to have more concurrent. And we support. You know, we figured out a way with our architecture to actually give that scalability. So those are the things that are promises that we're not being able to deliver. And I think with StarRocks that we're seeing it with some of the customers that we have. For instance, we have another e-commerce customer that is using it. Actually, it's not an e-commerce. It's a platform that a social platform that uses it to instantly, with millions of users, to instantly understand what's going on and deliver new information that's relevant to them, right? So that's the kind of example of a use case that illustrate how we solve those problems.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point as I think about it, because if you look at who's going to win in particular markets, I mean, I won't say it's an outright Highlander market these days across the board where there can be only one winner, but to a certain extent, we are in a monopolistic phase right now of our economy. If you look at Uber, for example, yeah, there's Lyft, but Uber, I think, is the dominant force for search. It's still Google. I mean, Google gets, what is it, 70, 80, maybe 90% of the searches. And you know, I saw an article, maybe it was from the Atlantic the other day, said, "Oh, is Google dying?" I'm like, okay. Here we go with media hyperbole. No, Google is not dying. They were complaining about search results or something. And it's like, yeah, well, go to Yahoo and go search on Yahoo and then let me know what you get. And they're not going to do that because they're going to go to Google, because everyone goes to Google, right? And for their particular things, there are vendors that seem to be just winning the space. But we'll pick this up after the break, folks. Don't touch that dial. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things real-time analytics. It's not new, but it's newly popular, and it's everywhere these days. So we've been hearing from several guests: Damian Black of SQLStream, Fadi Azhari from StarRocks, and Greg Michaelson, formerly of DataRobot. And maybe Fadi, I'll throw this one over to you, even though I know there are lots of hiccups along the way. There are still some amazing things happening now with data and real-time data. And I was kind of hinting at this last segment. If you look at the companies that are succeeding, that are doing very well in the world today, almost without exception, they have some deep analytics play where they have figured out how to leverage speed, whether it's in booking flights, for example, whatever engine that they have, ad networks, for example, things of this nature that are very, very data intensive and very speed intensive. You think ad networks, that's really, I think, the center of gravity in terms of innovation around analytics. But maybe give us some sense from your perspective on how Star Rocks and similar technologies are really changing the game and sort of shepherding the pivot points in business. What do you think?
Sure. I think we see it right in front of us. Certainly in the customers we're engaged with and the use cases that we have, because the problems we're really trying to solve, which we're delivering with our platform, is really to allow them to speed the time to value for their services, right? So at the end of the day, their business intelligence is driving their organization and what kind of new services they need to deliver and what kind of operations they need to run in order to deliver those services. So solving the problem at the heart by giving that real-time insight quickly on fresh data and easily across the organization is exactly what they're looking for. So this is what's really starting to power, to your point, Eric, some of those those organizations adopting it and using it. And we're seeing business analytics and business logic really driving it at the heart of their organization instead of some edge projects inside the organization. This is really now adopted and maintained inside the organization with the knowledge of the entire organization, the CIO.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Damian Black, maybe I'll bring you back in here. Sometimes when you stop hearing about something, it's not because it went away, it's because it's now everywhere and it's just sort of accepted. And I think that we're seeing an interesting pivot point in the industry where analytics is no longer just something for the dashboard. It's a lot of times it's being baked right into operational systems, and that's where you want it, right, Damian? You don't want it just to go to someone's dashboard so they can think about it and go, oh, maybe I should change this or that. Now, you want these analytics baked into operational systems so that you're changing the behavior of people on the front lines and how they operate. What do you think, Damian?
Yeah, I mean, you need to have, you can't rely on people to make split-second decisions reliably. And when you have so much information that's coming from everywhere, I mean, there's a lot of bread and butter decisions that have to be made, whether it's turning the kettle off when it's boiling. But when you look at everything that's going on, you need to have that automation continually running reliably. And that's really the bread and butter analytics that's powering the whole world that we live in today. It's a connected world of information. And I think it's the antithesis of people, carefully pondering and making that strategic next move. What we need is the brakes to be applied in the car when there's someone stepping in front of it. We need all of those sort of safety systems and systems that just keep things running smoothly. And if you look under the hood of how these systems are being put together, yeah, that's where the analytics stuff is being placed now.
Yeah. I'll bring Greg Michaelson back in just to kind of, again, talk about how things are changing and maybe just focus on the people who are getting it and are kind of figuring it out and making changes. I mean, one thing I loved about DataRobot was how easy it is to use. And, this stuff is, I think it's moving towards becoming under the hood technology. We're still maybe some distance from that. But, when you have to stand up a Hadoop cluster to get started on loading massive amounts of data and analyzing it, that's not going to work anymore. At least it's not going to work for a lot of use cases. You need a tool that's just going to help you immediately understand something. And that to me was always one of the perks of the DataRobot approach, was how you'd load a data set and it would throw 12 common algorithms at it and come back and give you what it suggested was the one algorithm that had the greatest covariance or the greatest efficacy, basically. And that's what we need, right? We need more solutions that just work and less solutions where it requires a whole lot of effort on the part of the team to build something. What do you think, Greg? Oh, you're on mute.
Muted.
Sorry, it's my first Zoom conference.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding. Certainly, DataRobot is cutting edge. It's an unbelievably amazing piece of software that will massively accelerate the rate of building these types of models, particularly in the time series space. DataRobot's time series components are revolutionary and substantially differentiated from anything else out there on the market. One of the things that I learned from our sales team at DataRobot was the 3 whys. When you're working with an organization and they are potential customers of yours, you have to answer the 3 whys. Why anything, why DataRobot, and why now? And if you get a good answer to those 3 questions, then you probably have a potential to have a good relationship there. The problem that I see is that most sellers skip the why anything question. They just assume, well, of course you need real-time analytics, or of course you need machine learning or whatever, and they go right to why DataRobot or why SQLStream or why Star Rocks. Well, because our product is awesome and you need it right now, kind of thing. The most important of those 3 questions, in my opinion, is the why anything question. Why do I need this technology? And if you have a good answer for that, then certainly the world is your oyster as far as vendors and products and solutions out there. But that's kind of a hole in the market right now, is getting to the place where you know what you actually need. So it wouldn't surprise me if some consulting companies came along, if like some of your big consulting firms or even some boutique firms kind of made a market out of helping organizations answer that why anything question. Because I don't think for many different technologies that there are good answers out there at all today.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And we have different teams. And maybe, Fadi, I'll throw this one over to you. I mean, I'm kind of on the outside of all this, but I talk to all the vendors and a lot of the end users and the consultants and so forth. So, it's hard to get an exact feel for things. But your data teams do tend, like your data warehousing team tends not to be your data science team, for example. Your governance team tends not to be the security team, as an example. But I think the lines are starting to blur, maybe because there's so much pressure from outside. Maybe I'm not entirely sure why. But you do want to have people. I mean, I throw out this information strategy group as an idea. I mean, Greg talked about these innovation teams at large organizations, but you always need on the client side to have connections and all the right people at the table, so you do make the right decisions, so you don't make these significant mistakes. I'll throw it over to Fadi. Do you think we're getting somewhere on that front? Do you think that the C-level executives and the boards are now figuring out this is very real? We can't play around. We can't make mistakes in this environment. What do you think, Fadi?
I think that it is the case in the sense that if you're a company engaged in providing an analytics platform that explains the why it matters in the first place, I'm teeing off of what Greg was talking about. This gives actually a very good opportunity to engage the organizations in not just multi-level, but across departments, so that you can bring the conversation around why do you need it for your business, right? First of all, before talking about your product, what are the pain points that you're trying to face? And let that be the connective tissue, so to speak, across the organization. And I think what we're seeing is, with the advent of making analytics easier to use, that you're able to have these conversations. You're able to solve business. You can show how is it easy to use and how you can solve quickly information with data that can actually directly tie to the business, right? And that conversation is starting to happen, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're also getting a lot of folks who are spinning out of companies like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and others, and they're kind of going out into organizations. That's one of the cooler things that happens, is you'll see a fairly new company with lots of clients right out of the gate. Well, how does that happen? It happens because someone was working for a bigger company, maybe like an Amazon or something like that, and they have relationships and they're able to very quickly tell a story, get venture funding. I mean, that's kind of the upside of the amount of money that Greg was talking about. And we joke, it's not just millions anymore in our business. It's not even just tens of millions. It's hundreds of millions of dollars are getting thrown at these companies. We talked about a Series G for DataRobot that was $300 million. Series G. That's a long way down the cycle of raising money, but it goes to show you this industry is real. It's alive. It's not going away anytime soon. Look these folks up online. You have been listening to the only coast-to-coast radio show all about data. It's called DM Radio.